Hey there, and welcome back to Discover What You Were Born to Do. This is the last week of the second section, and I am so glad you are here. We're heading into the home stretch. This week, we'll talk about another unconscious force that may be driving your decisions, your thoughts, and your social programming. Many of our decisions are influenced by the culture we live in, and most people are unaware of the power that the household they were raised in, their education, or the society around them has on how they make decisions. Today, we're going to investigate those influences to make sure they align with who you are and what you really want so you can make decisions that truly serve your best interest. As we get started, let's take a look at our roadmap, review what we've done so far, and see where we're going. Remember, to find work that matters to you, you need to know three things. The first is who you are. The second is how to make decisions that are aligned with who you are. And the third is what you want. And here's where we are on the roadmap. In week 5, we talked about stepping into a role of personal leadership and adopting the mindset of CEO of your career. In week 6, we talked about how to use your inborn navigational system, your internal GPS that's designed to help you make decisions. Last week, we talked about how to determine which part of your mind is driving your decisions, you or your instincts. And this week, we'll talk about what's driving your decisions, you or your social programming. Before we do the breathing exercise, I want to check in with your survival brain, that part of you that's trying to keep you safe, but may also be creating resistance. I want you to take a moment and notice if you've been experiencing any feelings of resistance, like feeling grumpy or slipping back into old habits. By now, we're well into the course, and your survival instinct knows that big changes are coming, so it's not uncommon to experience a lot of resistance at this point. One coping mechanism that may be showing up for you is very similar to the one we talked about last week. While criticizing others is directed outward, this one is directed inward. This coping tool is criticizing yourself. If you notice a trend of putting yourself down, self-deprecation, or even making fun of yourself, it's worth paying attention to that signal. It may be an unconscious way you're distracting attention away from the real cause of your discomfort, in this case, the changes we are purposefully introducing into your career. And even though this change is deliberate, your survival brain doesn't know that. It just sees a potential threat that could create instability, and it's trying to keep you away from it. The way to keep moving forward is to remember that you want to be on your edge of growth, but not past it. I know it can be tempting to go all in and change everything at once, especially if you're feeling stressed. I am absolutely that personality, and I speak from experience. But pushing too hard will eventually backfire and keep you stuck in the same cycle you're in right now. So even though it's less exciting, slow and steady growth is the key to lasting transformation. It's also worth noting that patterns of self-criticism might be arising because it gives you a feeling of safety and familiarity. If you have a history of being criticized by friends and family, criticizing yourself can feel like a security blanket in a sea of change. Remember that your instincts seek out what's familiar because it's known and therefore feels safe because it's survivable, but not because it will help you realize your dreams. If criticism or any other coping mechanisms are really showing up for you, try to catch it the next time and feel the impulse to criticize or distract yourself. Take a step back and investigate how you're feeling. You can even use the tools from week 5 to reverse engineer what's really causing your underlying discomfort. And most importantly, I want you to resist the urge to judge yourself. I invite you to see criticism as a kind and caring signal that you're experiencing something that needs to be addressed. Check in to see where you are on the continuum of change. Are you on the edge of growth, or are you past that point? Do you need more time with the information from last week, or do you need to talk about it with a friend to see what's really true for you? Figure out what you need to do so you don't get overwhelmed and quit moving forward altogether. One way is to help your nervous system regulate with a breathing exercise. So let's do that now. Today, during the breathing exercise, you can keep your eyes open or closed. You can even do this exercise when you're doing chores around the house. It's designed to be used in the midst of a difficult moment, so it can be helpful to practice it in real life situations. Let's begin. Wherever you are, bring your awareness into your body. Take a couple of slow, deep breaths. Now gently even out your inhale and your exhale. Nothing extreme. It should feel natural to your body. If at any point you lose track of your breath pattern, just gently come back to the task at hand and return to evening out your inhale and your exhale. As your breath becomes even and as you're ready, elongate your exhale. Nothing extreme, just a little bit longer than your inhale. Remember, this elongated exhale is the opposite of how we breathe when we're under attack, and it can help us come back into a more regulated state. I'm going to hold you here for one more minute to practice, but as always, listen to your body and only stick with this pattern as long as it's comfortable for you. You'll hear some music in the background so you know I'm here, and at the end of 1 minute, I'll let you know. Great. You can let go of the breathing pattern and come back into a regular breath. Now that you're in a relaxed and creative state, I want you to imagine your ideal workday. In this ideal workday, you're at a point in your career where you're able to direct the work that you do. As you wake up and open your eyes for the day, notice what you do first. As you get ready for the day, notice what you choose to do and not do. Pay attention to how your morning flows. As you head into work, think about what you want to do today. And as you arrive at the place you work, notice how you choose to get settled. Also, notice the type of work you've chosen to do today. Are you looking at the big picture or at small details? As you do your work for the day, notice if you're working with your hands or imagining things in your mind. Are you solving big problems or checking off small tasks? How often do you take a break? Also, notice if you're doing your work in a serial order or if you're doing many things at the same time. As you head back into your personal life, notice what you do with the rest of your day. Is it similar to your workday or is it different? Are you more active or more restful? Also, notice how you recharge. As you start winding down your day, notice if you have a routine or if you're more spontaneous. And as you close your eyes for the day, feel appreciation about the type of work you were able to do today. Take a deep breath and feel the satisfaction and freedom of being able to choose the work that suits you and is aligned with who you are and what fulfills you. Great. You can come back into the present moment. Even when you spend just a few minutes daydreaming about your ideal future, you allow yourself to experience the feeling of that day. This not only gives you some relief from your current situation, but it can also help your body learn how it feels to be content in your job. So, this week, we're going to take a look at how your thoughts and social programming work, how they influence your decisions, and how you can change the way you think to align with who you are and what you really want. Before we get in too deep, I want to echo a statement by Dr. Una L. Ferguson, a professor of psychology at Truman State University. She says, while we may not be able to change our genetic makeup or our specific life circumstances, we may be able to direct our intentional behavior in such ways that are beneficial to our well being. Dr. Sonia Lubomirsky, a professor of psychology at UC Riverside, goes on to say that our genetics, our circumstances, and our intentional activities all factor into our happiness, and as much as 40% of our happiness is left for the intentional activities that we choose to engage in, the things that we do and think every day of our lives. Harkening back to our discussion in week 5, I want to reiterate that there are some things in life we cannot change or control. Fortunately, there are some aspects of life that are up to us. Also, none of this material is intended to disparage anyone for the way their mind naturally works or assume that there's one right way for a brain to function. The diversity of thought among us is a huge benefit to humanity. This work is simply meant to give you information and tools that may help you understand your own mind better and help you make the changes that lead you to the life you truly desire. But remember, you are the CEO. If any of this material is counterproductive for you, trust yourself and only glean what helps you move forward. Even if only 1% of this material works for you, that's enough to make a difference in your outcome. If you alter the direction of a ship even by 1%, that ship will eventually change course. And if you set that ship's navigation to hold that 1% change over time, you will completely alter its destination. So let's dig in. First, let's start with the nuts and bolts of the cognitive mind. Knowing the mechanical functions of anything can help demystify seemingly magical activities that make it seem more actionable. It leaves it less likely up to fate and more like it's a problem to solve. I'm a person who really likes to know how things work because once I understand it, it's easier for me to make a change. I remember an example of this in my first lesson with my voice teacher, Jeannie Lavetry, in New York City. As a classical singer, I'd been having trouble regulating my breath and my resonance in the very long and florid musical passages that were typical for my voice type. My previous teachers had said things like breathe into your back or sing from the top of your head or use diaphragmatic breathing or breathe into your belly, none of which made any sense to me. We breathe into our lungs, not our back. These instructions just left me feeling like I was missing something big that everyone else understood. It wasn't until I started working with Jeannie, who was doing scientific vocal research with otolaryngologist Peek Wu, that I really understood how the voice and the breathing mechanics functioned. And it turned out my frustration with my previous instruction was warranted. None of the breathing instructions I had received before were accurate. Jeannie was the first person who taught me the technical anatomy of singing and confirmed that we don't sing out of the top of our heads. We breathe into our lungs, which expand, creating the illusion of breathing into our belly if it's relaxed. We can use our intercostal muscles to expand our rib cage and create more space for air. We can also strengthen our abdominal muscles to help us control the release of that air, and we can align our body to use our air more efficiently. In this one technical lesson, she not only released years of self-doubt for me, but also helped me figure out how to regulate my breath and improve my resonance, a problem that had plagued me since I was a child. So if you're like me and you like to know how things work, and if how your thoughts and beliefs work has been frustrating or mystifying, I've included this next section especially for you. So what are thoughts technically? In simplest terms, thoughts are electrical firings in your brain. They are impulses that run across a sophisticated communication network. These impulses create a neural map made of 100 billion neurons and 100 trillion connections that lay the framework for how you see the world. This map sets the stage for all of your decisions in life, including your career decisions. It creates the backstory and the reality you live in. When you think a thought, regardless of where it comes from, an impulse is sent and connections are made between neurons across the myelin sheath, which we'll talk about next. So, the first time a new thought fires, it's like bushwhacking through the dense Alaskan wilderness. But each time you think that thought again, the path gets more defined and easier to travel. Eventually, that thought path gets beaten down into a footpath, and then a trail, and then a dirt road, and a gravel road, and eventually a paved road, a highway, and if you think that thought often enough, it will become tracks for a fast moving train. This is the same way our habits, and especially our habits of thought and belief, are created. It's through repetition. Technically, each time you repeat a thought, a layer of fat and protein called the myelin sheath is put down on a connection path called the axon. This myelin sheath not only insulates the axon from damage, much like a power cable that has an insulating sleeve, but it also helps speed up the connection, just like pavement helps a car drive faster on a road. Myelination is a very efficient process that saves us precious energy and calories, and it's the reason we're able to learn new skills and turn them into habits. If we didn't have this function, it would take an extraordinary amount of energy to do the most basic task or make the simplest decision. It's also important to know that this myelination function is neutral. It doesn't care if you're thinking a positive thought, a negative thought, if you're thinking something that's true or that's totally false. Every time you repeat the thought, regardless of the content, your body helps you think that thought more automatically, so the brain uses less energy. Myelination is one reason why old thoughts and habits can be tough to break. It's not impossible, but years of myelination can create deep ruts that take focus and effort to avoid. This well-worn path is also the reason I ask you to consider using the education and skills you already have if it matches with your desires. You've already spent a lot of time and energy creating strong neural pathways, and if you can use those established paths to build your dreams, it will take you less effort than building them from scratch. If you want to go in a different direction and you need to get a new degree or other education, understanding the myelination process can help you allocate your schedule appropriately so you can factor in the time and energy that's naturally required to build out an entirely new neural network. Because that's what change actually is. It's an entirely new neural network. So, how do thoughts and beliefs get reinforced? Myelination is one of the many ways your thoughts and beliefs get reinforced in your mind. But there are a few others that are worth pointing out so you can become more self-aware and not fall prey to them. The first is a concept called cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance describes the unease we feel when we have thoughts and behaviors that are inconsistent or contradict each other. This can show up when you're presented with a new idea that conflicts with beliefs you hold or behaviors you're currently engaging in. And in fact, your level of cognitive dissonance with the material I present is one of the things I'm checking for when we talk about where you are on the continuum of change. If what I say aligns with your worldview, you may not feel any discomfort at all. But if it flies in the face of everything you know to be true, you may feel a lot of resistance and tend to dismiss it. What's interesting is that scientific research has shown that humans tend to look for ways to keep their knowledge, actions, and attitudes consistent, and they actively avoid situations and information which would likely increase that dissonance. Basically, our cognitive bias compels us to justify or rationalize our thoughts and behaviors when we're presented with new information. This is one of the reasons that changing our mind can be difficult, especially if that change threatens our social connections, our sense of self, or our perception of safety. Signals that we haven't resolved a mental inconsistency like cognitive dissonance are guilt, anxiety, and shame, all of which consume our energy. And even if you try to ignore disruptive information, the discomfort can sit like a process running in the background of your mind, siphoning off precious resources. If you're telling yourself that you don't experience these inner conflicts, that's actually one way cognitive dissonance shows up. We all face these dilemmas from time to time as we encounter new information. They don't have to be deep moral struggles. It can be as simple as being in a job you hate and justifying it to yourself and others. This justification not only resolves the mental conflict, but it also makes you less likely to look for a different job and keep the status quo. Cognitive dissonance in the workplace can also look like staying in a job you know is mentally, physically, and emotionally damaging because of the time, money, and energy you've already invested in your current career. This is also called the sunk cost effect. Your brain will rationalize staying in the job because you want to rescue your investments, even though you know you're in a losing battle. The second way our mind reinforces our current beliefs is called confirmation bias. To avoid cognitive dissonance, confirmation bias compels your brain to seek out evidence that reinforces your current beliefs in an effort to keep your world stable. Essentially, we seek out information that we agree with and only look at what confirms our beliefs, which creates a sort of echo chamber reinforcing our thoughts and beliefs in order to help us feel safe. And we all do this. It can sound like, I don't want to know that, or, ugh, don't tell me that. We don't want to know because it will disrupt our current reality. Confirmation bias is one reason we have to actively include diversity of all kinds in our lives, because our natural tendency motivates us to only associate with ideas and people that confirm what we already believe. Confirmation bias is also one reason we tend to stay stuck in our beliefs about what's possible in our careers. If you were surrounded by caregivers who hated their jobs and held the belief that work is supposed to be miserable, you most likely unconsciously adopted that idea. From there, your brain started seeking out information and experiences that confirmed that belief. You saw it in the shows you watched, the people you associated with, and the media you consumed. This tangible reinforcement then makes it hard to believe anything else, because you see it played out in real life day to day. The longer you hold this belief, the more layers of myelin are put down to make it easier and easier to think that way. After a while, challenging the thought may feel ridiculous or even dangerous. Because if you change your mind, not only are you fighting against years of mental reinforcement, but it has the potential to disrupt your social connections, the way you earn your income, and how you relate to yourself and the world around you. All of which your instinct for stability and energy conservation will resist until you prove that the change in thought is safe and your brain starts reinforcing this new reality. The third strategy your brain uses to reinforce your thoughts is called the frequency illusion, or the Bader-Meinhof phenomenon, and it affects your ability to focus. Because it would be mentally overwhelming to focus on and process every single element in your surroundings, this phenomenon helps your brain only focus on the objects that are most relevant to you. Let's say you purchase a black car because you think they're rare in your area and it will set you apart. But as soon as you get in your car to drive home, you're infuriated to see shiny black cars everywhere. This is the frequency illusion at work. When we key in on an idea, our brains go to work helping us focus and see it more often. So the black cars that were hidden from you before, because of this selective attention, are now everywhere in your field of vision. They were there all along, you just couldn't see them. The fourth way our mind reinforces our thoughts is with perceptual blindness, and it's similar to the frequency illusion. It's a mechanism that blocks out objects and information that are readily available to you, but that you aren't focusing on. There have been multiple experiments proving this phenomenon, including experiments by Christopher Chabris and Daniel Simons. Let's watch an experiment of perceptual blindness and see how well you do.
How many passes does the team in white make? The correct answer is 15. But did you also notice the dark team's uniform color change, the roof's color change, the dark team's gender change, or the moonwalking gorilla? In case you missed any of these, here it is again.
So, how well did you do? I think demonstrations like this are not only fun, but they're also useful reminders that what we think we see in our environment is just one version of reality, and it's usually the one we're conditioned to pay attention to. It also reinforces the fact that you can shift your focus and begin to reinforce new thoughts and new beliefs about your future. Cognitive dissonance, confirmation bias, frequency illusion, and perceptual blindness are just a few examples of the mental processes that work together to help you reinforce your mental map. And just like myelination, all of these functions are neutral. So even though they may have contributed to some habits that are counterproductive, you can use these same principles to build new habits and help you create a fulfilling career. If you've ever heard advice about the power of focusing on what you want and how that helps you create something new in your life, this is why. It isn't magic, it's how your brain is designed. When you focus on a particular goal, your brain gets on board and supports you by giving you more feedback and reinforcement to make that focus easier. I hope that learning about these mechanisms also helps you see why being stuck in a rut isn't a personal failing. You aren't doing it consciously. There are factors in your biology that actively resist change in order to create a sense of security for you. The good news is that there are other biological functions that help us adapt to change in our surrounding environment. Your job is to stay in that sweet spot on the continuum of change so you have enough stability to feel secure, but also stay open to change so you can take the risks necessary to create a better future for yourself and those around you. The last biological factor affecting your thoughts and beliefs that I want to discuss is something that not only lowers stress, but also sets you up to make better decisions, and that factor is sleep. Sleep is one of the most important functions related to maintaining any influence over your habits of thought and your decisions. You know from experience that it's hard to be in a positive mood and make good decisions when you haven't slept in a couple of days. And here's why. As you sleep, your glymphatic system, and that's with a G, glymphatic, goes to work repairing damage that's occurred during the day. It feeds the brain, reorganizes, and does routine maintenance like flushing out waste to keep the brain healthy. It's also during this time that a process called synaptic pruning happens. Synaptic pruning removes less active synapses and strengthens the connections that are used most often. This is when the thoughts and mental connections you no longer use get marked for disposal, and the ones you use more often get strengthened. This is the process of use it or lose it. And like myelination, this process is neutral. Synaptic pruning doesn't know if a neural connection is helping you find a fulfilling career or holding you back. It just knows if you've been using the connection recently or if it's been dormant for a while and should be archived to make room for new mental growth. I know that sleep is one of the things we tend to sacrifice in our busy world. And I don't give you this information to add more stress if you don't already get enough quality sleep each night, but I think it's important to have the information so you can make more informed decisions. Skimping on sleep may seem harmless, but it's detrimental to your ability to make good decisions about your career, stay focused, phase out old habits, and acquire the skills and mindsets you need to successfully navigate this change. So, how do you move from an unconsciously programmed map of thoughts to a more conscious and deliberate pattern of thinking that can help you move toward a fulfilling career? First, what makes the change possible is something called brain plasticity. Up until the mid 1900s, it was widely believed that the brain stopped changing around age 25. And while most rapid changes in our brains do happen in childhood and adolescence, modern research has shown that our neural maps grow and change throughout our lifetime, even into very advanced age. Second, I think it's important to realize there's no magic pill. Changing the way you think isn't an overnight process, and it takes a lot of time and energy to do it, and it's important to give yourself a lot of grace and room to grow if you want to make a fundamental change. If you've been told that you'll never amount to anything for the last 20 years, don't expect to reverse that thought by next week. It's going to take time to create a new connection and slowly but surely reinforce that different perspective. It's also useful to know that when you find yourself in an unwanted thought loop, you didn't do anything wrong. Our thoughts, emotions, and chemical reactions in our body are so closely intertwined that it's impossible to have total control over what you think. Emotions can arise out of our instincts as a signal from our unconscious mind, creating fearful or anxious thoughts. They can also come from our social programming or just what's going on in our body. Fortunately, this is a two-way street. Emotions can create thoughts, but our thoughts about our circumstances can also influence how we feel. We can see evidence of thoughts influencing our feelings because we know that beliefs vary between people about the exact same circumstances. For example, the mere thought of a spider will cause one person to feel totally panicked, while another person will like them so much that they keep them as pets. We also see differences in thoughts and beliefs very clearly in different cultures around the world. People think differently about all kinds of things, from how to run a country to what to eat for dinner. In fact, there are very few thoughts and beliefs that are universally agreed upon. And that's a good thing. This diversity means that if you'd like to choose a different way of thinking about a certain subject, you can. Thoughts occur in your cognitive mind, and remember, if it's cognitive, it can change. Last, you need to know that the way you think is more heavily influenced by your social programming, especially the influence from how you were raised, your culture, your environment, your education, and your life experiences than you might expect. And a lot of your social programming is so old and ingrained that it may feel like it's a fact to you, like the sun rising. It's so unconscious that you don't even think to question it. So, how do you start shifting your thoughts? To begin changing thoughts that don't align with who we are and what we want, we first have to become aware of what we're thinking. When we're willing to uncouple ourselves from our thoughts as the absolute permanent truth of our identity, we can begin to look at them more objectively. We can take the role of the observer, like a researcher in a lab who's curious about an amoeba moving under a microscope. Noticing your thoughts may not seem like a big step, but you can't investigate what you aren't aware of. Now, noticing isn't getting lured into the drama of a thought, and it also isn't judgment or criticism about what you're thinking. It just looks like the facts, like, I noticed that I'm thinking a lot about how much I hate my job right now. When we assume the role of the researcher and observer, our thoughts simply become pieces of data. The next step is to test your thoughts. Once you're able to notice your thoughts, the second step is to test those thoughts. This is where you take a thought that you've noticed and pull it out of the habitual, instinctive, or unconscious state and do some investigation. Imagine your thought is like a really fascinating rock or geode that you want to turn over and over to understand it better. You can ask yourself questions like, where did this thought come from? Do I even believe this thought? Does this thought really help me? Then, consider how that thought makes you feel. Some thoughts move us forward and inspire us, and some weigh us down and cause paralysis. Some thoughts feel good, and others make us feel like crap. Here are a few examples of some limiting thoughts that you might want to pay attention to. Everyone's against me. No one appreciates how hard I work. I never get promoted. I'm failing. I have to do everything around here. I give so much and I get nothing in return. There is seriously something wrong with me. I can't do anything right. No matter how hard I try, nothing in my life changes. I'm in too deep. I can't dig myself out of this mess. One of the most important questions you can ask yourself is, does this thought or belief move me forward? Is this thought actually helpful for me? Notice that I'm not asking you to decide if your thoughts are true or not in the beginning. That's because your thought may be so ingrained in your mind that your bias may think it's true right off the bat. It may be so ingrained that it's really hard to think otherwise. So in the beginning, just ask yourself how it feels and if it moves you toward the life and career you want. If you decide the thought isn't helping you, one step you can take is to choose a new thought. If you have a habit of thinking, no one will ever hire me, that's going to influence your decisions and behaviors. Most likely, you won't even apply for jobs and you might not even look for better opportunities. Now, I'm not advocating for false affirmations. You don't have to lie to yourself and say, everyone wants to hire me. Remember cognitive dissonance. It makes false affirmations not work either. If you can find something that is true and that also feels a little better, like, well, people can't hire me if I don't apply, it will crack open the door of opportunity just enough for you to wedge your foot in. And as you go through this, I feel like it's important to realize you're not alone. No one is immune from this process. Like you, I experience it myself. I've written several times about how I move myself from thoughts and beliefs I was taught through the discomfort of challenging that thought and finally to developing a new one. I write about it not only because they're usually funny in retrospect, but also because I believe it can help us feel less alone when we see it through a real life example. If stories like this are helpful for you, I've included a link to one of these stories in the transcript. I also know that for some people, it can be helpful to brainstorm ideas until you find one that moves you in the right direction. So I want to play around with that list of limiting thoughts from above and see what else we can find. I'll throw out some ideas, but add in yours as well. If your habitual thought is everyone's against me, a new thought could be, I may feel like everyone's against me right now, but I'm resourceful and I can figure out how to get the support I need. If your habit of thought is, no one appreciates how hard I work, a new thought could be, I am working too hard and it's okay for me to set some boundaries. If your original thought is, I never get promoted, you might try this thought. It's time to schedule a meeting with my boss to see why I'm not getting promoted. If your original thought is, I'm failing, your new thought could be, this is really hard right now, but I also know I'm doing my very best and that's enough. If your habitual thought is, I have to do everything around here, a new thought could be, it's okay for me to ask for help and stop doing everything. If your original thought is, I give everything and I get nothing in return, a new thought could be, it's okay for me to make sure I'm being fairly compensated. If your old thought is, there is something wrong with me, another thought could be, I'm fine with the way I am, but this might be the wrong environment for me. If your habit of thought is, I can't do anything right, your new thought could be, I'm feeling really low right now. I think I need to take care of myself. If your old thought is, no matter how hard I try, nothing changes, a new thought could be, maybe I should call a friend. I think I need to get a different perspective. And if your habit of thought is, I can't dig myself out of this mess, a different thought could be, change takes time, and it's okay for me to take things step by step. I want you to notice that the replacement thoughts are more complex thoughts. And although they're counter to the first set, they don't say that everything is perfect or idealistic. That would be denial. What they do is allow you some space to move forward, even if it's just a little tiny bit. Now it's your turn. What are other thoughts that you could replace with the thoughts that are holding you back? So, how do we make these new thoughts into a habit? If you want to go even further from choosing a thought to making that thought a habit or your new normal, remember the principles of how thoughts are made. If you want to build a new pattern of thought or habit, you need to think that thought a lot. The more you think the new thought over and over in your mind, the stronger you make that neural pathway. And if you think you're too old to change your thoughts, remember that the brain is plastic and can grow and change until the day we die. So no matter how old you are, if you want to change how your mind thinks, you can. We'll talk more about how to build habits in future weeks, but for now, just know that if you want to establish a new pattern of thought, think that thought a lot. This week during the exercises, I invite you to be the observer. Pay attention to what you're thinking as if you're watching a movie. The exercises this week are designed to help you bring awareness to your thoughts and begin to steer your ship in the direction you want to go. So let's go through them together. For the first exercise, take a look at the exercises from week 1, your preferences. First, read through the exercises and notice what you think about the things you like and don't like. Do you notice any judgment or stories about how these preferences should be different or how they're unacceptable? If so, jot those down. Next, notice how these thoughts influence your decision about your career. Third, make a note of which thoughts really hold you back from finding the career you want. And last, brainstorm some new thoughts that might move you forward. For the second exercise this week, we're going to do the same thing with the exercises from week 2, your conative strengths. First, read through your conative strengths and notice what you think about your innate talents. Do you notice any judgment or stories about how you wish these strengths were different or how they're inappropriate? If so, jot them down. Next, notice how these thoughts influence your decisions about your career. Third, make a note of which thoughts are really holding you back from finding the career you want. And last, brainstorm some new thoughts that will move you forward. For the third exercise this week, we're going to repeat the same process with the exercises from week 3, your learned skills and abilities. First, read through the exercises from week 3 and notice what you think about your learned skills. Do you notice any judgments or stories about your formal education? Also, notice if you have a tendency to discount your informal education. Next, notice how these thoughts influence your decision about your career. Third, make a note of any thoughts that are really holding you back from finding the career you want. And last, brainstorm some thoughts that can move you forward. For exercise 4, we're going to take a look at your thoughts about your leadership potential. And since we've established a pattern of questioning, let's keep using it so you can reinforce the pattern in your mind. To start, grab your exercises from week 5. First, read through the week 5 exercises and notice what you think about the idea of being CEO of your career. Do you notice any judgments or stories about your leadership abilities? Also, notice judgments you have about leaders in general and jot them down. Next, notice how these thoughts influence your decision about your career. Third, make a note of which thoughts are really holding you back from finding the career you want. And last, brainstorm some new thoughts to help you step into a personal leadership role. For exercise 5, we're going to take a look at the patterns and trends that show up in your thoughts and social programming. Many times, we have one or two underlying patterns that feed all the rest of our thoughts. Much like a book with different chapters or a song with multiple verses, our mind can play variations on a theme with our thoughts. For example, if your caregiver consistently called you lazy in your formative years, you may have unconsciously accepted that as the truth, even though you work extremely hard and rarely give yourself a break. The idea that you're lazy may be driving the thought, doing work I like is lazy, or using my strengths is lazy, or not getting another degree is lazy. And these variations on the same thought can get woven throughout the decisions you make about your career. Let's use our same pattern of questioning to investigate these potential trends. First, read through the previous 4 exercises. Do you notice any trends or patterns of thought, especially in step 3 of each exercise? If so, jot them down. Next, notice how these thoughts influence your decisions about your career. Where do they repeatedly show up? Third, make a note of how these underlying thoughts hold you back from finding the career you want. And finally, brainstorm some new thoughts that will help move you forward. As usual, there are a few common mind traps I notice when clients are questioning their thoughts and social programming. Mind trap number 1 is logic alone produces the best decisions. This is a pretty pervasive thought that gets thrown around because there's a belief that logical decisions aren't influenced or swayed by emotions. However, studies have shown some surprising results. A study in 2017 compared the sympathetic activation or the fight-flight activation in intuitive or comprehensive judgments versus purely cognitive or rational ones. What was surprising was that when a purely cognitive decision-making style was used, like weighing the pros and cons, the sympathetic nervous system or the fight-flight response had a much higher activation than during a more holistic or intuitive decision-making style. The researchers found that the more comprehensive decision-making style allowed the participants to make decisions in a more relaxed and less emotionally activated state, which gave them access to more information to inform their decisions. This isn't to say that logic should be ignored. It shouldn't. It has a really important place in making a good decision. But holding to the belief that using logic and logic alone produces the best decisions sets you up for failure because it ignores your desires, your unconscious signals, and all of the other elements that go into a comprehensive decision-making process. Mind trap number 2 is, I'm not influenced by social programming. It's easy to believe that we're in control of our minds and that we're above the influence of cultural and social influence. But studies show that not only are we biased in our assessments of ourselves, but also we think we know ourselves better than we actually do. In a culture where we're taught to be independent, it can be really hard to give up the idea that we may not be in full control of how we were taught to think and behave. It's okay that you have thoughts and habits from your childhood and culture. We all do. And being smart or feeling superior won't protect you from these influences, but awareness will. As you become conscious of the stories you've been taught, you have the opportunity to question them and decide for yourself if they're working for you. Mind trap number 3 is, I don't want to be this deliberate. I just want to go with the flow. This is a totally valid way to live life, and if this is what you want, I support you. But since you signed up for a course designed to help you find a fulfilling career, I'm going to make an assumption that you either aren't in the job you like or you want to prevent the career disasters you've seen in other people. And here's the thing. Going with the flow may work if all of your genetics, your environment, your social programming, and all of the other details work out perfectly for you. That's not typically the case. Even when people seem to go with the flow, they often have other influences you can't see. If you dig a little into their background, you usually find that they've been working toward their goal for a long time, often for 10 years or more. Truly just going with the flow is only a good strategy if you don't care what kind of career you end up with. Also, remember that humans are hardwired for the status quo. So if you go with the flow, you're most likely to stay in the same career cycle you're in right now. If you hold this mindset, I'd like you to ask yourself some questions. Why are you really choosing to go with the flow in this particular situation? I know it can be the right approach in certain situations, but sometimes it's a cover for other things. Are you really afraid of failing? Do you actually feel stuck and lost and don't know what to do? Or are you actually afraid of what people will say if you go for your dreams? Also know that being deliberate doesn't mean you can't change your mind. It's okay to set a goal and adjust your plans along the way. So if you struggle with just wanting to go with the flow, I encourage you to take a small risk and be a little more intentional. You could start by steering your thoughts and behaviors gently in the direction you want to go. As we come to the end of this lesson, I want you to know that questioning and changing your beliefs is something that happens over time. This kind of growth is a gradual process. We outgrow thoughts and beliefs just like we outgrew small chairs as a child. And even if you have a watershed moment where things suddenly click together for you, know that it will still take time for your mind and body to catch up and integrate it as a way of operating. So be gentle with yourself. If you slip back into old thought patterns, that's okay. Just keep moving forward. So let's set you up for the week with a clear plan of action. This week, I want you to focus on noticing the thoughts you are thinking. That's the most important skill. I also recommend that you read the quick morning emails to help you integrate what you're learning. And now that you've had today's lesson, you realize why I send the daily emails. It's to reinforce those new thoughts and create that myelin sheath. Even just looking at them and deleting them will help trigger those new thoughts for you. I also recommend that you do at least 1 minute of the breathing exercise every day. As always, you can find all of the research I've mentioned today in the transcript that's available for download wherever you're listening to this. Next week, we start the last section of this course. This is where we take all of the information you've learned in the last 8 weeks and start applying it to your career decisions. You now have a good understanding of who you are and how to make decisions, so you are ready for the next step. I hope you enjoy this week. Gaining direction over your thoughts is a game changer. It really puts you in a leadership role over your mind and your future. I'll talk to you next week.